Okay, hello. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Karim. I work for NHS England as a Principal Terminology Implementation Specialist. I'm going to talk to you about implementing the SNOMED CT Unified Test List. And really, it's been about for me as a terminologist, it's been about the local lab code mapping challenges to SNOMED CT. So I work in the pathology and standards implementation team, and we're a very small team. We're arguably too small for this ambition of rolling out FHIR and SNOMED into the lab space. So we are working with as many partners as possible, the labs, pathology networks, and LIMS system suppliers. And the ambition is to replace, at the moment, is to replace the legacy messaging specification and predecessor read codes used to report lab test results with a FHIR SNOMED CT model. So I'm going to talk you through the reasons we need to replace those products in the context of the current terminology, national data flow of lab test reporting. Why we concluded we need to do mapping, and how on earth we scale up this thing. And that's really about the lessons learned as we've been trying to do this. The NHS pathology services perform over 1.2 billion tests every year, costs 2.5 billion. It's 4% of the total NHS spend, expected to increase at 10% per year. And really the highlighting point for us is that it's the test result codes account for a third of all clinical information recorded in primary care general practice EPRs. And you know, for us that's quite a big deal because we want to enhance the accuracy and the ability to report that content in a more structured, reproducible format. So the legacy data products, we're looking at the NHS 003 standard, which is PMIP EDIFACT. It defines the structure pathology test reports shared between labs and general practice. It carries read codes from a subset known as the Pathology Bounded Code List, the PBCL. The UK NRC, now at NHS England, ceased to maintain read codes in April 2016. This means that it's no longer possible to produce new content. So new test codes that come along, we've got stuff coming in from, you know, the genomic space, sequencing tests for cancer screening, genotyping in transfusion medicine to support sickle cell and thalassemia patients. And the bottom line is we can produce that content in SNOMED CT, but it ends up being paper-based reporting, and then there's the manual overhead of recording the codes upon receipt on the EPR side, and you know that's quite a tragic way to do things. We really need to get you know a FHIR SNOMED implementation to automate all of that. So yeah, since 2018, all NHS healthcare providers have been required to use SNOMED CT in accordance with the Information Standards Notice. That's been rolled out in the primary care general practice space, but now we are attempting the labs to convert to SNOMED reporting. Okay, so I've already begun the reasons. I'm not going to try and sell you FHIR and SNOMED CT. We are at a SNOMED CT Expo, but in the lab space, the EDIFACT messaging is, you know, it's limited because it can't carry SNOMED CT. Even if you extend it to carry SNOMED CT, we then have the problem of complex test reporting, and FHIR is, you know, it can't support that. FHIR is more malleable, flexible to to design fire SNOMED CT for more complex structured reporting. And my colleague, Philip Brennan, is going to talk to you all about that stuff. He's a senior business analyst, fire expert, and that's in the presentation later on. So go to that. He'll show you the kind of the models that we've developed together to express the fire SNOMED CT design. Then there's the barrier to a new market entrance. EDIFACT is old. They want to use FIRE, the international standard, for the aforementioned reasons as well. And the computer types like to talk in XML and JSON now. So yeah, as a terminologist, finally, I've got a little complaint about recodes in them being ambiguous, which I'm going to come on to a little later. So briefly, what we've done so far is we've recreated, let's say, versions of the PBCL content that's flowing in a more accurate, reproducible, machine-readable format in SNOMED CT. We are developing. We've developed the fire process, the fire profiles for the UK core, and that's the stuff that Phil Brennan's going to talk to you about. And we're going to attempt, hopefully in the early next calendar year, a data flow pilot with a leading system supplier and one of our main lab networks to test the flow of fire SNOMED and output all the stuff around that and the guidance documentation to hand over to implementers to roll out. In parallel with that, we're looking at how on earth to do this this lab code to SNOMED CT mapping exercise. So it's a lexical mapping thing between local codes and SNOMED CT. So we're using the NHS England terminology server, which is the UK instance of Onto server, developed by CSIRO. And we're publishing a data standard to support this rollout. So right, I mentioned that we are replacing PBCL in SNOMED. I haven't really mentioned unified test lists, so and there's a good reason for that. This is all evolving quite fast. Our previous team was larger. We had a user researcher and other business analysts, and we developed a fire SNOMED design in accordance with user needs, the end-to-end workflow and all the stuff that needs to be interoperable, along with the lab scientists to ensure that we get our content right and our design right, as accurate as possible. So we replaced those disciplines bulleted, and so during the course of that, that discovery work, it's less about a national test list. SNOMED is huge. We know that, and then the lab disciplines are even bigger, and our discovery and our discussions with users and implementers are more indicative that what's required are sets, value sets of implementable content of terminology, as opposed to pertaining to disciplines ready for implementation, as opposed to an all-encompassing test list. And we will, as we hopefully rebuild our team, move into other domains and look at discovery work there and how to represent that stuff. But currently, our prime directive is, stabilizing the implementation of a fire SNOMED model. So when we talk about the lab test results in a code system, in SNOMED CT, what are we talking about? It's the observation codes. So the observable entity hierarchy, the codes that take a value. And I put in 3 relatively straightforward examples there to illustrate the range of data types. So you go from the quantitative numeric result with a unit, through the semi-quantitative resulting to the more qualitative stuff, the positive, negative, equivocal type reporting. And on the right-hand side is a representation of the first code in its in all its glory, in its machine-readable, logically defined format in SNOMED. So this is the, for the clever stuff, the downstream processing, comparability, reproducibility, querying, decision support, and so on. And it's the more, in our understanding with our user research, the more accurate way to represent this stuff. And you'll see it's, and I'm going to talk about this further next. It's subsumed by its kind of predecessor code. That's the mapped code from PBCL in SNOMED, and that's the kind of more higher level type code, which is less clear. But we need those subsumption relationships by automated classification, which is a lot more efficient than handcrafting those linkages for the purposes of the migration. Okay, so the terminology data flow. As I've said, we start with lab local coding. So labs are all coding in their local or proprietary code lists. So on the left-hand side, it's a local report code. There's other bits of information in the data form as the data entry takes place. But the code in itself is, it contains implicit information really to them about, the sample type, for example, in the case of reporting a substance concentration in blood sciences, whether it's blood or spun down stuff, it's reported in plasma or serum. There's a middleware conversion to read code that's assured by the labs. The read code is carried in the edifact message. And we have the PBCL mapping tables, which give us the pathway from read version 2 on the left, to read version 3 on the right. So we've got code IDs and description IDs respectively, and then the forward map all the way across into SNOMED CT, observable entity hierarchy. But even when we get there, it's a semantic equivalent of read, and therefore there's ambiguities in terms of, labs can report different data types against a level. What is the level? Is it the qualitative, quantitative type of measure, first of all? And you can only really disambiguate this from all the other information recorded aside the code, such as computable units. And in the darker space below, I'm trying to illustrate that, that we've developed these more specific codes that open out, things like measured properties, in this case, the mass concentration of the albumin. And also, they subsume even more specific codes that may contain the technique by which the test is done, where it's relevant to interpreting the result. And really, we want to get to reporting, this stuff and recording this stuff in the clinical system. But we envisage a period of, during the migration where it'll still be this type of SNOMED. And that's why we have the subsumption relationships in order to enable the forwards and backwards compatibility. And just to really drive that message home in terms of the relationships, just looking at the terminology in another example, and what I'm trying to highlight here really is where you go from local report code either via PBCL semantic equivalence or directly to the more specific, more accurate content in the red boxes. It's a one-to-many relationship either way. And hold that thought, because that's the one of the complications in the mapping process. So yeah, again, when I say I'm an organism antibody level, what am I? Am I the quantitative concentration being reported, or am I the more qualitative type of result as a positive negative detection? And all the stuff on the right hand side here is what we're trying to document as we go along, because this modeling exercise is really not easy. So there's lots of limitations that we're not sure about, whether it's concept model or hierarchies, and then trying to logically define an ambiguous concept to inherit the more specific stuff is even more complicated. So we've got modeling approaches for that, and our chosen modeling approach. So why are we mapping? Along the way of our collaborations with users, we've discovered that it's firstly least disruptive to the current laboratory information management system workflow. We're looking at about 130 labs. So even if their workflows, are they're working for them, and the test results are being reported. So even if their systems are limited and dated, it's not necessarily a SNOMED solution. It's costly to upgrade to SNOMED natively, firstly, and even if you do, that's not going to solve the problem of we have to tease apart what's SNOMED and what's interaction design and usability. And really, I think the more important point is that the user research told us that even though we designed the more specific content in accordance with the accuracy of what's being reported, they're not suitable as longer statements to be used at the interface, and the data entry is more atomic on the lab scientist side. So that's why they prefer their local codes and what they mean to them. But the point is to use SNOMED CT as the reference terminology for all the clever interoperability stuff. So labs mean the same thing, tracing back to their local terminology and their data input. With the machine readability of the more accurate SNOMED CT content, you can do the data comparison and the decision support and clever analytics. And just thinking ahead a little as well, we want to try and support that longer term model of automated structuring of patient information, with all the NLP stuff that seems to be coming in AI. The machine readable logic is going to be really pivotal and important in that space. So as far as the terminology flow goes, we would like to go to SNOMED CT via middleware mappings, ideally, and then that gets carried by the FHIR message and recorded in the EPR on the other side. So how do we do that? Yeah, we've got this great stuff. We've got a FHIR terminology server, which means that we can do value sets and FHIR value sets and FHIR concept mapping using clever mapping tools. The one we're using is one we've attempted to use rather is Snapper, again developed by CSIRO. You've got Snap to SNOMED from SI, and B2I have got SNORAY. We've looked at these tools as well, and so upstream of that, yeah, you can do really clever things. You can use ECL to constrain SNOMED value sets, load them in alongside local code source systems, and then click a button and do an automated lexical map, which is great. This is what we need. So we took this out to labs, and sort of in parallel with that, I'm not going to call it user research because we've lost our user research. So we did some pseudo user research at the same time. Call it informal interviews with lab managers, lab scientists, system suppliers at the same time, because we really wanted to tease out, how this is going to work, and if it's going to work, what additional actual needs are there and business requirements. Yeah, so you can do the clever mapping stuff, but there's a whole workflow around this as well that I'd like to see added on. Like firstly, if you go back to the lab's middleware and you do the mapping and you create static maps, export them and implement them. We've got the first challenge of the one-to-many thing that I was talking about before, and it's not a static one-to-many choice all the time. So, for example, in the blood sciences area, sometimes a test reported from an analyzer is in serum or plasma, and it's calibrated to mean that it's in serum or plasma, and so they're comparable. The result is comparable, but there are clinical circumstances I'm given to understand whereby the test has to be done specifically in plasma or specifically in serum, and then they're no longer comparable. So there's this dynamic element to the recording of information and mapping to the accurate SNOMED code to port across via FHIR as well. Then when you look at the end-to-end workflow and applying lab expert or clinical expert leads, I mean this applies to mapping on the clinical side as well. There's the assurance process and capturing all that and all the metadata and the governance, the audit trail of what's going on, and storing that in one place and not losing that information, and being able to update that information, not just with upgrades in SNOMED content, but also where content is missing, and how do you communicate that and feed that back into the process. So I'm not sure that instantiation of static maps via middleware is going to work the way it did with PBCL, because PBCL was one-to-one local code to PBCL mapping. So I'm wondering now, and this is where there's a list at the end of this, and I think it's in the next slide of the outcome of this work. But I'm sort of wondering now whether not, doesn't mean we do away with the middleware. You can still have mappings going via middleware, but is this something that we need to think about centralizing? So this isn't architecture either, by the way. The architecture discussions are in a separate team with technical architect specialists. But what I'm trying to get at here is when we do the mappings kind of upstream, we want to maintain all of that stuff upstream. Do we need a centralized way of storing and sharing mappings, capturing the full governance and audit trails and assurance process? Also, there's that relationship to the value sets I mentioned at the beginning. Auto-generating value sets and all the workflow that goes around that as well. So we end up from the mappings all the way through to value sets of SNOMED CT that you can implement in different lab disciplines. And again, applicable to the clinical side as well, clinical disciplines too. And when it comes to the updates and maintenance, yeah, as I said, it's not just about updates and SNOMED CT versioning. It's also about I'm a lab expert. I'm missing a SNOMED code or I need to create a new SNOMED code for a new test result. The connectivity of the process to the NRC to request or update SNOMED code, and that feeding back directly into the process of the workflow. And there's possibly another axis to this, and we aren't talking to the AI and the machine learning experts yet, but we probably should be, because I feel like that's something that's going to inform, the design, the sort of tooling and structure that we need. Ultimately, the quality of the mappings that's held centrally informs, better models, and we want to get to the point where we're automating, I think, the structuring of interoperable information, so that there's an auto population of the FHIR message. The interface input arrives at that content directly, the most accurate SNOMED content directly. And I'm given to understand that one day, maybe in the next 10 years, the analyzers are going to be doing all this themselves anyway. So the analyzers will be reporting the test result directly. Of course, there's the admin stuff that goes around it. Okay, so I'd like to tell you about next steps, but really where we are is like we're sort of regrouping, and I've sort of retracted slightly from the mapping thing to think about the actual user needs. So where we are is there's an obvious need for more intuitive, user-friendly interfaces. We already know that clinical lab expert staff are already busy, and they're already stretching themselves to make time for this informatics stuff. So yeah, we need intuitive workflows and stable environments. collaborative platforms to do mapping work, capturing the audit trails and the metadata, etc. We have a list of intrinsic functionality for mapping, but there's not enough time here to go into that stuff. So we're documenting all that stuff too. The ability to share, update and maintain the mappings. And then what do we do about this, the static mapping versus the dynamic runtime mapping requirement, which are the one-to-many problem. And ideally linking this up with outputting value sets of content and the overlaps in specs, tooling, governance, maintenance requirements of that stuff too. And ideally, I would really like to involve user researchers and interaction designers quite heavily in this process, because if it's all about the user needs and how to do this most effectively, then they're the guys who know that. We're not the experts in that area. We've just kind of done our extraction of information as much as we can of all this tacit stuff that's going on that we need to really do something about, in my opinion. So okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much. And back to the chair.